Now, I was thinking that the best way to get the discussion started today is to actually have Dean Galea begin the discussion with Dean Leung, and then after that we'll open it up to the floor.
So thank you again, and thank you, Dean Leung, for, as I was saying at the dinner table, I think it's a really fascinating study. So I suppose my opening question would be asking you to bring the two talks together. Can you talk a little bit about the, given these data you presented, how that builds on the fact that everything you showed is in Hong Kong, which is one of the densest cities in the world, and how the elements of a tightly dense, highly populated urban area influences what you're seeing in your study?
This is my second PhD viva, obviously. I think the interesting thing is I used to do a lot of, in fact I still do, a lot of infectious disease dynamical modeling. So the big question that is always in my mind is how this fabric of social capital, however defined, social networks, and socio-political events, or even geopolitical events, like what we have just been experiencing, actually lead to a mechanistic explanation. It's probably unfair for me to say this, but I often say to my basic lab colleagues that they have a much easier time with what they do because it is so well controlled. You have got perfectly controlled laboratory conditions and specially bred animals or specially tuned or designed primates. But we, despite best efforts, can't control the conditions nearly as well in any kind of population. And we can't really have a very good control group. The best control group is to compare with yourself. But it's very difficult when you have topics like climate change. Everybody breathes the same air. Social unrest. I mean, just in 2019 alone, in cities, big cities, the same social unrest happened in Hong Kong, Delhi, Santiago, Paris, and all these places, and Beirut, and all these places have dealt with them differently and suffer different mental and physical consequences. But how can you compare even Hong Kong and Paris, let alone Beirut and Santiago, or Barcelona for that matter? So I think really the cutting edge would be in trying to piece our observational data together and come up with biological mechanisms. That to me is really the holy grail, but it would actually have to rely on much cleverer people than me. Maybe Michael will be able to do it in his career, but probably way too late for me.
Yeah, I'll add a comment to what Gabriel said. And the one of my favorite papers that our team ever did was we looked at population mental health in cities around the world and where there are large-scale social disruptions and traumatic events, and how many of them there are, and then looked at how many studies there are. And not surprisingly, you find that wealthy cities are well studied. Less wealthy cities are not well studied. Of course, less wealthy cities have much more social disruption and large-scale traumatic events than wealthy cities. So you have this peak of studies here and the peak of problem over here. So places like Delhi, for example, where there is a fair bit of large-scale social unrest, we have very little data, if at all. And from a point of view of populations, we simply should have those data. And I think I agree with 90% of what Dean Leung said, which is that having data from places like Delhi, places like Beirut, will help us knit together these findings into understanding how different elements of cities ultimately drive mental health. The 10% I'm not sure I agree with is that we need biological mechanisms for that. I do think that biology will be an important adjunct to understanding mechanisms. But I think there is so much we still need to understand before that, in some respects, biological mechanism will be gravy. But I think there's a lot more that we need to understand that can get us at the question of how do you build cities that generate health. Shall we open up for questions?
So now if anybody out there has a question, now is your time to raise your hand and ask it. Oh.
Thank you both. I think both discussions are fantastic. One of the variables which you didn't mention is that we are now in the era of how we communicate is different. You know, we all speculate about social media. We've all been struck by the fact that we've had multiple cities go off into different countries, really become entangled in internal fights, seemingly simultaneously and so on. And so when you look at that phenomenon at that level, and you look at the many factors that you look at about social cohesion, how do you both personally think about social media and how we communicate as a factor? Is it the way out of some of these dilemmas? Is it the underlying factor which ties many of the observations together? What do we do with this sort of form of communication?
I'll limit us out partly in answer, and Gabriel, I'm sure you'll add more. So I guess almost 20 years ago, after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, our group did some of the first papers that looked at television viewing and how that influenced depression and PTSD symptoms. And the reviewer comments on those papers were scorching, basically saying, this is nonsense. You cannot get mental health symptoms through television. You know, fast forward 20 years, where you have a paper being published in a journal like The Lancet, where there's a clear association between social media viewing. In fact, it's the only association and the burden of mental health symptoms. And for those of you who are not in the academic world, you must be thinking, well, it's sort of obvious. Isn't it obvious that social media viewing probably doesn't matter? It is kind of obvious, but the academic world takes decades to adjust. So I think there's been some time to adjust to this notion that viewing or participating in events, not necessarily live in person, can actually have real consequences to your mental health. And I think seeing findings like this is very confirmatory. Some of the best work before this that showed this was after the Boston bombings, actually. So people remember there was a marathon in Boston, there were bombings, and there was a paper that was published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that showed social media as the strongest correlate of mental health symptoms after the event. So I think we're beginning to understand that. And in the context of cities, to bring it back to the top of the conversation, I think this really matters because social media allows you to amplify the consequences of an event, that no event becomes local anymore. All of a sudden, an event that could be experienced by a few thousand people, even tens of thousands of people, all of a sudden is being experienced in vivo by millions of people, which expands the footprint of the event.
I think there is no better illustration of the causal role, which I didn't show and was not able to show, the causal role of social media, or any kind of media, on health. And that, I would say, the sort of poster child, sadly, is the anti-vaccine movement. Ever since that paper, that also appeared in The Lancet, many, many years ago, by Andrew Wakefield, since withdrawn, and he's been stripped of his medical license and now lives in the US, I understand, making a very good living. I mean, just look at the measles outbreaks in the last 12 months alone. If that's not media-driven, what is it? And if you actually look at the Vaccine Confidence Project out of the London School of Hygiene, spearheaded first by Heidi Larson and then taken up by the Wellcome Trust in the Wellcome Global Monitor Program with the Gallup organization. They just released the first report a couple of months ago that showed very clear associations of what you read in media, what social media is like in different countries, and the level of confidence that the respondents said that they have or have not in vaccines. And the most surprising thing was actually France has the lowest vaccine confidence. But if you come to this part of the world, so in the WhatsApp, Instagram world, that would be one ecology. But if you actually come to this part of the world, where at least officially you cannot access any of those platforms that I just named, but if you actually go on the WeChat platform, the number one discussion topic about vaccines is not vaccine confidence, it's about vaccine quality. So everybody trusts vaccines, and they all want to know, where can I get the real thing? And just up until September, Hong Kong is the number one destination. And so what we're actually going to do, starting probably this summer, is we have a program to look at the role of social media, and we're going to do some intervention trials with Tencent, as in the WeChat platform, using natural language processing and AI and big data to see if we can actually not manipulate or shift public opinion, but really trying to do some controlled experiments in that space. So, you know, that really to me is a very exciting field, and it does either save or cost lives. And measles is the perfect example.
All right, thank you. Next question.
Thank you both, Professor Galea and Dean Leung, for your fascinating presentation. Actually, the World Health Organization has predicted depression as one of the most important or major health burden in the coming century. Do you think it is correlated with the urbanization of the world? If so, how does it correlate? And I'm thinking like maybe it is also like underestimated or under concerned issue, just like maybe like climate change is like, it seems like a unsolvable trend or things going on, but it seems like the global effort on it is not that much to deal with this problem. So do you have any suggestions or idea that we can work on it, something like that?
Well, number one, depression is unipolar. Major depression is the largest contributor to global burden of disease worldwide because it's common and chronic, which makes it very costly and affects a lot of people. So that's entirely the case. I would not say ever that cities cause anything, because city is not a city. City is a constellation of features in a social environment, physical environment. And the question is, what aspects of cities are causative of poor? What causes of cities are causative of good mental health? And in the context of depression, in the context of tying these presentations, social disruptions, that you saw in Dean Leung's presentation, the positive effect of social ties. And although he didn't point to it, you can actually also see it in marriage, which marriage is typically a protective social factor against depression, for example, and at the same time, the negative effect of social unrest, social stressors on depressive symptoms. So you have these opportunities. This is the point I was making in my presentation. I think cities are neither an opportunity nor a challenge. They are both. They are, if we maximize the positive health promoting features, they are an opportunity. If we do not, they become a challenge. Same with population aging. If we let aging be by itself, you're going to end up with an epidemic of loneliness. If we actually see aging for what it is, which is a shift in the human resources available to generate a healthier world, then it's a real opportunity. Dean Leung was just talking about vaccine hesitancy. It is a classic example of something we call social contagion, which is ideas, bad ideas spread, and they take hold. But social contagion can also be used for good. It can also be used in the context of happiness and human flourishing. So I think that the interesting approach is to think systematically about what are the aspects that generate positive mental health so we can increase those aspects, and what are the aspects that are generating negative mental health so we can decrease them.
Let me just make 3 additional points. I agree with 100% of what he said. So first point is, if you actually look at Singapore, Singapore is now doing something very exciting. So Singapore has reorganized themselves into 3 major healthcare clusters. So Hong Kong has 7. So they copy us. They do 3 big clusters now. But what we should copy them is, each cluster is geographically based, and what they're now doing is they're now building communities for aging and aged populations, and they are asking the healthcare clusters to actually design these so-called retirement communities. And that's really fascinating, and there's a very good paper by a young faculty, a young woman faculty at NUS School of Public Health, with their former dean, John Wong, in PNAS last year. So I would encourage you to go and look at that. And that's something that is really sort of visionary, asking the health and social sector to actually go and design the retirement wellness places, whole communities, whole districts. Mainland China is doing something similar. So in Chinese, they call it Yiyuan, okay? Medical and social wellness. Yiyuan Sei. Now, most of the major developers actually see it as a huge commercial opportunity. So they'll be given a piece of land. They will promise that they'll build the world's best 3A hospital with a few satellite community hospitals, and then nursing homes, infirmaries, step-down care. But, by the way, for this piece of land and the adjoining bit, can you give it to me for commercial development? And then I'll give you the rest for free. So that's really the sort of mode of development of all the big major mainland cities right now. So they're doing something similar to Singapore, except that they're doing it on a more sort of macro scale. And the third comment that I'm going to give is about Boris Johnson, but not about his politics, but the comment pertains to his brain, not his brain, but the person who advises him, Dom Cummings. So Dom Cummings is, depending on who you talk to, he could be the devil incarnate, or he can be the most brilliant guy to be the number 10's advisor. Immortalized in the film about Brexit, by the way. So Dom Cummings recently, I think 10 days ago, released a blog which was an advertisement for civil servants. And he has always been actually a hero of mine. I don't subscribe to his brand of politics, but I think that he is the smart version of Steve Bannon. And Dom Cummings has come to on my radar screen about 10 years ago, when he first wrote a 80-page policy document rethinking higher education for the UK. Beautiful piece. And in the most recent job ad for civil servants, he basically wants to wipe out all the civil servants in Whitehall and replace them. And he actually highlighted some guy called Judea Pearl, who's the father of causal inferential thinking in our field. He's actually from Berkeley. And the fact that it has come to his attention, sort of this esoteric, inferential causal thinking guy who works in Berkeley, but actually has informed a lot of what epidemiology has been doing and going, is very impressive. And so I think that I have nothing but good things to say about my former colleagues in government, but I think we can do with a good dose of Dom Cummings, not just cunning, but actually smart cunning in how we run big cities, starting with our own.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more.
Thank you for the very interesting talk. So I've seen all this data on the life expectancy from different cities and countries. I'm just always wondering, have any people follow up in different way? For example, have a similar genetic background or ethnicity, but they stay in different, for example, different city or different country. What would be the life expectancy change? For example, for Hong Kong, people actually, a lot of them stay in US, right, for generations. Would that kind of comparison also very informative? Because we always wondered what would be the best combination for the longer expectancy, right? But I think it's always confounded by only look at country or geological location, because it's always mixed by different genetic background. So would that be a comment on that? Because I'm not in the field, so.
Let me take a stab. The question, of course, pertains directly to migration and health, and there is a field on this. It's a messy field, but it's an increasingly important field on migration and health. And the question is, are people healthier, less healthy once they move from place A to place B? The answer to the question is complicated by many factors. Factor one is, it's typically healthier people who migrate to begin with, because humans are not sort of lab rats, you can move around, and it tends to be healthier humans who have the resources, and by that I don't mean just necessarily mean financial resources, I mean the health resources to migrate. So you already have healthier migrants, that's number one. Number two, we know that in the short term, people who move, they tend to be healthier than their home country or home city for a while, until then they adopt the habits of the home city or home country, when their patterns start to look a lot like your home country. The third aspect of it is whether or not people, when they exit and enter another place, whether they assimilate in the new place, or whether they persist within ethnic or homogeneous enclaves. So people who persist in, let's say, ethnic enclaves is the term that's typically used, which is they're staying with people from their community, which happens very frequently. Then those people are buffered from adopting the habits and the health of their host community. So it's actually a really super complicated question, but the bottom line is that there probably are a complex set of processes that take a person who then moves from city A to city B, and their health, how it's affected both by the pre-migration conditions, by the migration itself, and by the trajectory after the migration.
Well, I'm just going to give you a one-sentence answer. Invite me back in 6 months' time. That's precisely the question that we are asking for Hong Kong, because we are actually a migrant community. In fact, the room that we are in commemorates the Portuguese colonization process, and Hong Kong, of course, is a living example of that. Don't forget, Hong Kong's population by 1950 was 500,000. From 1950 to the mid-60s, Hong Kong's population expanded to 2.5 million. So anybody on the street who's over the age of 75, 75% of those people will have been a migrant into Hong Kong. Michael and I are actually interrupted by this social unrest, and so we're now getting back to that piece of work. Invite me back and I'll show you some empirical results in about 6 months' time.
All right, well, so that wraps us up. Thank you guys for coming and sharing with us tonight.